Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something, well, pretty mind-bending, the dark sea of awareness. Now, you might have heard the term, maybe from Castaneda, but the source we're digging into today. It paints a picture of something far more alive, a living entity holding secrets about consciousness. And this isn't just theory. Our main source here is this really raw, first-hand account from a webinar, someone's actual journey into this sea. It's quite unique.
It really is. We're basically following one person's intense experience to explore awareness, the self, maybe even how the universe got started.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is how something so abstract, this dark sea, becomes, well, incredibly real, tangible.
Exactly. You asked us to take these sources, packed with personal experience and some heavy concepts, and pull out the key stuff. So get ready. You might have an aha moment or two. This could really shift how you see reality. Okay, so let's dive in. The initial perception. How did our source first describe seeing this dark sea of awareness?
Well, first off, it was seen as something external, huge,
Yeah.
like a boundless, shoreless, dark sea, maybe like you'd see under storm clouds. That kind of vibe.
Okay, like a stormy ocean, but different.
Oh yeah, very different. The sky above it. The source says it was absolutely shining, empty. But weirdly, no sun, no moon, no visible light source, just this bright emptiness.
Huh. A shining empty sky. Strange. So it wasn't just a visual thing then. Did it, like, interact, communicate?
Not like we talk
Yeah.
initially. It communicated through what they called emanations, sometimes vapors or fibers. Subtle thing,
Fibers, like threads of energy.
kind of. And for years, the group just moved above its surface. They'd return sometimes, occasionally visiting this harbor area.
A harbor in the dark sea.
Yeah, a place where lots of dreamers, others exploring this, gathered. And they'd get lessons directly from the dark sea through those fibers.
Interesting. So for a long time, the basic idea was this thing is out there, separate from us.
Completely separate. That was the initial hurdle, yeah, an external force. But then came this turning point, a big one, an encounter involving something called the disk and forming a new double.
Okay, the disk, new double. These sound like specific concepts from this framework. What happened?
Right. So the new double, which is like a more complete energetic version of oneself, it basically suggested they should unfold the petals.
Unfold the petals. That sounds delicate. What were these petals like?
The description is really cool. Each one was slightly vibrating, like they were, I don't know, singing a song.
Huh.
Each had its own unique rhythm, a vibration you could almost hear.
Wow, vibrating, singing petals. And that changed things.
Fundamentally, from that moment, the dark sea wasn't just external anymore. It started inviting them inside. It totally shifted how the group worked with energy. It wasn't observation, it was immersion.
An invitation inside. That's huge. What was the first lesson, the first thing they did once they were in?
They were taken to this area, just surrounded by petals. And each person got one petal. The instruction was simple, or seemed simple. Take this petal, do something with it.
Do something with it. Vague. What did they do? Were they confused?
Oh yeah, definitely confused at first. Took them a long time. They sort of incorporated them into their own energy structures, their petal chains. But eventually people started experimenting. Jan Manuel, he coiled his and then looped it. Some others just, well, reabsorbed theirs. Didn't even occur to them they could give it back.
And the speaker whose account we're following.
He decided to twist or coil his petal into a tube shape, a very individual act.
A tube. So did that simple twist matter?
It mattered a lot. It marked a real turning point. It led to completely new personalized training coming directly from the dark sea itself. Like that act of specific creation was noticed.
Yeah.
So after that petal exercise, things really ramped up. The speaker and Jan Manuel, they got these two new, pretty intense tasks.
Okay, what were they?
First, to study the boundaries of the dark sea of awareness. Figure out where it ends, if it ends. And second, to find a set of points, these energy nodes or centers that actually influence the dark sea, described as these complex, twisty energy knots.
Studying boundaries, finding influencing points. Sounds like mapping the unmappable, but wasn't there an even tougher one?
Oh yeah, the big one. To reach the highest density at the boundaries of the dark sea of awareness and use their memory to shift through the membranes of level and density.
Okay, break that down. Highest density, membranes, shifting with memory.
Right, so imagine incredibly high, subtle layers of energy or reality, the source calls them densities. They're placed at this foggy barrier between the 11th and 12th densities, super high up, energetically speaking. And the task was this paradox.
A paradox, yeah.
To move beyond the barrier, but to remember oneself while being on this side of the barrier. Like be in two places, or hold your sense of self across this immense divide, using just memory.
Remember yourself from the other side? How did they even tackle that?
Yeah. They tried different ways, did it separately, did it together. They even tried remembering each other across the barrier, basically willing the other person to appear on their side.
Wow. And the result?
The source just says it was completely phenomenal, incredible, a massive breakthrough.
Okay, incredible. How? What did they actually learn about memory from this crazy exercise?
This is the kicker. They discovered that our memory contains the entire universe. Like everything, every element, every detail, every single atom.
Whoa! The entire universe in our memory. How did they demonstrate that?
Well, the speaker gives this example. He left just one petal of his energetic double on one side of that barrier, moved the rest of it across. And that single petal, using its memory, was able to recall all the details of the universe and completely recreate his entire double, pulled them back together.
Just one petal recreated the whole thing from memory.
Yeah.
That completely reframes what memory is. It's not just recalling the past. It's like the blueprint for everything. So think about what that suggests about your own memory, your own potential.
Exactly. It's not just storage, it's generative. And after this, after they grasped this about memory, the dark sea itself started, well, telling its own story.
The Dark Sea told them how it came to be, its own origin story.
Yeah, it began to tell and show how everything happened.
Amazing. So how did it start, according to the Dark Sea itself?
It started with the very first petal, just one, being thrown, sort of emerged into this shining emptiness. And in that emptiness, it began to perceive itself, to realize it was a separate creative unit.
A first moment of I am. What were its first, well, not thoughts, but impulses?
Kind of like the questions we ask, what is this, where am I, who am I? But then the really key one, how do I look? And the difference is, it didn't just wonder. It instantly acted on that impulse to observe itself. No hesitation, no deliberation like humans do.
It looked at itself. And what happened when it did that? What was the result of that first self-observation?
It wasn't just seeing a reflection. When it returned to its original spot after observing, suddenly there weren't one, but three entities. Yeah. The original one, the one that went to look, and the one that came back. It was like the act of perception itself caused multiplication.
3 from 1, just by looking. Wild. What did that reveal about, well, about everything?
It led to this fundamental realization, purely in energy terms, that everything is a wave, vibration. They saw how vibrations move, how they hit these vibrational frequency barriers, and then they either bounce back or they continue, but as a lower density vibration, like going from energy level 5.1 down to 4.1, a bit less intense.
Okay, so vibration is key. And the act of observing created more petals. What happened when these 3 started looking into that?
You guessed it. Their research thought, which is also vibration, right?
Right.
It created even more units of petals.
Seriously, just thinking about it made more.
Apparently. And they were like delighted by this. They just started multiplying themselves to infinity. Billions and billions instantly because, time isn't really a factor in these realms.
Billions, wow. But the source says it was still the same petal. How does that work? Infinite copies, but still just one.
That's the core insight, right? Unity in multitude. Despite the staggering numbers, fundamentally it's all expressions of that same original awareness. It really messes with our ideas of being separate individuals.
Okay, so now there are infinite petals, understanding vibration. What did they decide to do next?
They decided, collectively, to get more ambitious, to create more complex things, other areas, other densities. But this meant actually shifting their position and staying there, not just observing and returning.
A cosmic relocation project.
Pretty much. 2 massive groups of these petals shifted out to what's called the first level from the center. And from there, they started planning how to build and develop the universe using these wave structures, creating different levels, different densities of creation.
So they became cosmic architects, dividing into smaller groups, planning out the first levels of energy or density.
Exactly. They ended up creating 7 levels of awareness density, accessible from that central glowing sphere they originated from. You can move up or down through these levels.
7 levels. The source used an analogy for this, right?
Yeah, like a big bureau of an engineering company. Different floors, different departments, each working on a specific part of the grand design of creation.
Okay, let's walk through them briefly, starting from the highest, the 7th.
Right, 7th density. This is the realm of bubbles, flasks, worlds, big picture structures. But here's a key thing. The petal itself, the core awareness unit, couldn't physically go further into these lower densities. Only its attention could project down. And this is where they developed the structures for cocoons.
Cocoons, those energy fields around beings.
Exactly. They kind of fix the bubbles of worlds in place. Moving down, sixth density. Here you find assemblage points as pure energy, like stars or flames, very close to what the source calls doubles, those energetic counterparts.
Okay, and the fifth.
Fifth density. Beings here have closed energy formations, not pure energy flow anymore. They have an assemblage point in the center. They're described as explorers, always looking for external energy. And importantly, there are no bubbles separating them at this level. More fluid.
Right, and then there's a big boundary between fifth and fourth. This is where it gets really interesting for us, right?
Absolutely. Between fifth and fourth density, the vibrational field suddenly contains worlds. Loads of them, like sea foam, the source says.
Sea foam. Countless worlds.
And these are the bubbles where our cocoons, our individual energy fields, are placed. This is key. Humans, and most beings on Earth, primarily exist in this fourth density. That's the main group.
And not everyone.
Right. About 35% of humans, according to this source, are actually anchored in the third density. Slightly different vibrational neighborhood.
Fascinating. Okay, lower still. Second density.
Second density. This holds the material components, what we perceive as solid objects, described very specifically as closed jars in geometric shapes, mostly triangles and bits of triangles, not circles or squares, interestingly.
Triangles and jars.
Okay,
The building blocks. And the final layer, the first.
The first density, the outer layer, this is the fringe, or the fibers. And this is super important for dreamers because it's the main way in and out for exploring beyond their own dark sea, the portal to elsewhere.
Wow. So from one petal looking at itself, this whole intricate seven-layered reality unfolds. Incredible.
Ah.
Okay, so they've mapped out their own universe, built these densities, but the journey wasn't over. The dark sea gave them another task, even more challenging.
You could say that. The next mission, find 7 objects located beyond its borders.
Beyond its borders. Objects. What kind of objects?
These weren't just space rocks. They were other dark seas. Their own dark sea knew them, like cosmic neighbor.
Other dark seas of awareness. Wow, how did they even travel between them?
They had to use that first density, the outer fringe we just talked about. But it meant crossing the shining emptiness, that barrier of perception between seas. You got a powerful push, an impulse from their own dark sea to get out there. But finding their way back, that was on them.
So they launched out into the cosmic neighborhood. What were the first encounters like? Were they striking?
The first one was pretty shocking. They found what the source calls the dead dark sea.
Dead. A dark sea can die.
Apparently so. Only the membranes were left, just the structural remnants. It showed these vast consciousnesses aren't necessarily eternal. Then they found a sick dark sea.
Sick. How did that look?
Its edge, its perception barrier was all uneven, like a deflated cloud, and the core petal representing it looked dark and very tired.
Wow. So what did they learn from this sick one? Why was it sick?
This was a huge insight. It had lost energy through its doubts about its own creation, about dividing itself into levels, about its purpose. It was basically undermining itself with uncertainty.
Doubts. So even at that cosmic level, doubt can drain energy.
Exactly. And this led to another realization. Our own human moods, feeling like this isn't for me or even everything's wonderful. Those feelings, those states actually originate from these higher levels. We're kind of reflecting these bigger energetic tides.
Our moods come from the dark sea level. That connects things in a wild way. Okay, so they visited 2. But there are infinite dark seas, right? How could they possibly visit all 7 within a human lifetime? That seemed like the problem.
Precisely. This source estimated it would take maybe 500 years to travel manually. Way too long. So they needed a different approach.
An innovation.
Yeah. They decided to build something. An emitter antenna. Jan Manuel called it the beacon of free will.
The beacon of free will, what did it do?
Its purpose was to gather a huge amount of energy, create this powerful upward flow, and basically light up or broadcast petals containing information about how their own dark sea developed. Send out their story, their blueprint. And each petal wasn't just info. It was infused with their intention.
So they beamed their evolutionary story out to the cosmos. What happened when they turned it on?
Instantly, millions of other dark seas received a petal. A petal containing the whole story of how our dark sea of awareness, the one we're a part of, developed. A massive instantaneous data share across universes.
Sounds incredible. A universal library card exchange.
But you mentioned an unintended consequence. Something very bad for us.
Yeah, this is where it gets tricky. These other dark seas got the info, and they seemed kind of amused, maybe. And they have this tendency to copy things they find interesting.
Uh-oh. What did they copy?
They thought it would be a good idea to copy beings like us, along with planet Earth. Basically, creating little pocket universes, miniature copies based on the blueprint they received.
They made copies of Earth and humans.
Thousands of them. And the really bad part, these copies started attuning to the speaker, the one whose account this is. Like thousands of synchronized dreams, pulling on his energy. It took him a year and a half just to break free from that constant resonance.
Yeah.
A serious drain.
Wow, be careful what information you share with other universes.
Yeah.
So through all of this, the memory tasks, the creation story, visiting other seas, the beacon, what was the final ultimate realization? It was the culmination of everything. They started to see themselves, and by extension, all of us, not as in the dark sea, but as projections of it. It stopped being external. It became intimate.
Not outside, but
Us. Yes. The source puts it plainly, it became what I am, what each of you is. I am the dark sea of awareness, as is each of you.
from a vast external sea to the very fabric of my being. That's a complete 180, a total shift in perspective.
It really is. And this journey, this understanding, it fundamentally changes how we think about ourselves and the tools we have. The source emphasizes.
Yeah.
Our memory is our only instrument that we can operate.
Our only instrument, really. What about something like will? We usually think of willpower as being quite central.
Right, but according to this view, will, as we think of it, our personal desire making things happen is not very accessible to us. Why? Because the real will originates from the decisions made way back by those original petals of the dark sea. Our experience of will is more like aligning with that flow, letting it pass through us rather than us generating it.
So we follow will, we don't create it. And memory is the tool we can use. Is there a specific method mentioned for working with memory then?
Yes, the core practice is recapitulation. Some might know the term. It's that deep dive into your personal history, re-experiencing events to reclaim energy and awareness tied up in the past. That's the way you actively work with memory.
Okay, recapitulation for memory work. But getting this knowledge, these experiences from the dark sea back into our everyday awareness, this sounds tough. How does the source describe that challenge?
It's a real bottleneck.
Yeah.
When you return to your physical body after these deep explorations, your awareness literally rolls into a tube. It gets compressed. And if you get distracted on the way back, have interesting side dreams or experiences in those intervening densities, the 12th down to the 5th, then that core impulse, the knowledge you gained, it gets smeared, diluted across other experiences. Harder to grasp clearly when you wake up.
Snared knowledge. Not ideal. So how do you bring it back cleanly? What's the trick?
Ideally, the source says to instantly jump into the body. A direct, fast return. Less chance for smearing. Failing that, you can try to carefully navigate through the densities on the way back, consciously avoiding getting tangled in other events.
Like flying through turbulence without getting knocked around.
Kind of, but the most effective long-term strategy, consistent recapitulation. It needs to become second nature, part of you. That's how you start to catch the rhythms of the universe and properly anchor these deeper insights into your waking life.
Catch the rhythms of the universe. That ties into another point, doesn't it? About how we perceive reality itself. It's not smooth.
Exactly. Our everyday reality, the way we perceive it, isn't like a continuous flowing river. It's actually a vibration that we track as discrete points, like snapshots or impulses.
Points, not a flow. So our mind connects the dots.
Pretty much. Our tonal, the everyday mind is trained to grasp only these points and create a straight line from them. That's how we build our sense of linear time and consistent reality. But we're filtering out a lot.
And what exists between those points, around those rhythms we track?
That's where it gets interesting. Around these rhythms of perception, there exists an infinite number of other possibilities. Infinite potential realities, basically.
And can we access those? The gaps between the points?
If your speed of perception is high enough, yes, you can skip between these impulses into these intervals. The source calls these jumps into the third attention, moving beyond waking and dreaming states. But if your perception isn't tuned for it, well, as the source admits, it probably just sounds like nonsense.
Jumps into the third attention. Wow. Okay, let's loop back to memory and that incredible test. The speaker recreating his double 178 times. What did that whole episode ultimately show about the double, the petals, and memory?
It hammered home the power of memory for sure, but also remember the end. The dark sea eventually returned all the original scattered petals, and he just rejoined his double seamlessly. It showed that even though each petal seems to have its own mind, its own will, somehow they're also, simultaneously, one single whole.
One whole, even with individual minds. That really challenges our basic sense of self. The feeling, how can I be part of someone else's mind? I'm just me. How does the source explain that feeling of separateness?
It calls that feeling an error, a misconception based on our limited perspective in this density. It argues that humans aren't truly separate. We're constantly influenced by everything. We're just taught to think we're separate, taught to ignore the underlying flow, and taught to believe our thoughts are purely our creations.
So we're not the creators of our
And
thoughts.
more like users of a selector. Ideas flow, and our awareness selects or tunes into them. But the petals themselves, they aren't limited like our human projections. They are unlimited. Any single petal, the source says, is equal to the dark sea of awareness. Our feeling of being separate, small, limited, that's an illusion created by the very nature of this density we live in.
An illusion of this density. Okay. So let's try to wrap this up. We started this deep dive talking about this mysterious external dark sea of awareness. And after following this incredible journey through petals, densities, other seas, memory itself, we've arrived at this profound understanding. We are just in the dark sea. We are the dark sea. Every one of us is a projection of it.
Exactly. Which leads to a pretty big question for you listening right now. If you are fundamentally a projection of this immense interconnected awareness, what does that really mean for how you see yourself, your limits, your potential? How does knowing this change how you think about your own will versus that bigger flow we talked about?
Yeah, definitely a lot to mull over there. It's
Yeah.
it's a completely different lens for viewing your own life, your own thoughts, your own reality. Certainly makes you question where you begin and end.
And speaking of deep shifts in cosmic concepts,
Hmm.
our next deep dive, we'll be exploring something the source calls the black vortex. Now, don't let the name scare you. It's tied to death, yes, but also very much to life, and perhaps gateways to entirely new cycles. So, as the source says, don't be afraid of the word. Be afraid of the process.
Sounds intense. Looking forward to it. Until next time, keep diving deep.